Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Broadcasting live. It's America's longest running talk show on computers. It's Computer America, bringing you the biggest names in technology with guest interviews, new products, and your emails. Listen live at computeramerica.com on any device around the world. Email the show at live@computeramerica.com or find us on social media. Be sure to check out our website for contests, giveaways, show notes, live video stream, podcasts, and more. You're listening to Computer America.
Hello and welcome into the Computer America Show. We are the nation's longest running talk show on computers and technology. Thank you for joining us, and I hope all of you are having a great day as we can make it a little bit better here on the show. As we have on for for all of you newcomers, you're in for a treat. This is our computer graphics expert, Mr. Dariush Derakhshani. Sorry, and he is, just very, very knowledgeable about, computer graphics, computer-aided design, 3D graphics, things like that. He is a teacher, he is an author, and all around just a very fun guy to listen to. So, yep, he's going to be here talking about a review he's done for MSI and one of their, I wouldn't even call it like high-end laptop, because that implies that there's others competing with like this thing is a beast of a laptop, and we're going to be talking about that, and also display technologies, because this is something that the landscape right now for a lot of consumers out there is dominated strictly by what is 4K, what isn't, what is HDR, what isn't. And display technology, there's a lot more to it. And that's the reason why something may be 4K and HDR, but have a $20,000 price difference between the two. There's a lot more that goes into display technology, so we're going to fit some of that in as well. Now, but before we get to Dariush Derakhshani, let's talk about ComputerAmerica.com, because that's where you will find anything and everything with today's show, including any articles we reference, any videos that we talk about, just anything that you need to know about today's show. We archive and put it neatly for you to reference over at ComputerAmerica.com, as well as, of course, the video archives, the audio archives, podcasts, things like that. Check all that out there. The next thing is, of course, the contest, which we give away a prize from Logitech every single Friday. Happy to do that. And yeah, we'll be having a new one. We will be reading their name live on the air here this Friday. And hey, it could be your name if you so choose to enter. All right. And let's see. Last thing is the video portion, where you can watch Computer America and not just listen. It's a lot of fun. Check it out. All right. So with all that being said, why don't we pull in our guest and get started here. So once again, Dariush Derakhshani, I have his full introduction, which actually, let's pull that up real quick, because he's worked on a lot of things that you've probably seen, and he teaches out at, let's see, and Dariush, I apologize, I should know this by heart by now, but I don't. So
no problem.
So here we go. CG supervisor at Los Angeles, California, and an award-winning CG generalist-lighter. And of course, he writes for he wrote a book about Maya, and has worked on many different projects, including projects like South Park. So Dariush, welcome on the show.
Hey, good to be back, Ben. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. Yeah, it's been about a month. Happy to have you back on, and it's interesting to see that you are still working with the MSI products, because I'm pretty sure you like 2 months ago you were hoping to get your hands on one, and I think last month you reviewed a different one, like it was kind of their lowest of the high end, which still says $2,500. But now you're talking about a new one. So did you want to start with the review of the laptop?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, this MSI is making a push into the workstation space. Mm-hmm. And this guy, the WS63 7RK is the model number. This is sort of their mid-range They have a super high-end one that's really set up for VR, but what I really like about the WS63 is that it is thin and light and very portable. I wouldn't say it's an ultrabook, certainly not, but it is certainly about the same sort of form factor as a MacBook. Probably a little bit bigger, but it's got a tremendous build quality to it. And I could see definitely taking this out on location and on sets to do stuff because it's pretty beefy, but MSI does offer stronger as well in this category, but obviously bigger, thicker, heavier. I think they've got something up around 7 or 8 pounds, getting up there, which is more of a desktop replacement. But what I found pretty remarkable about this machine is that the graphics is run by a P3000, Quadro P3000. That's a Pascal chipset for the NVIDIA GPU with a 6 gigabytes. And for a laptop that is pretty thin and pretty light, that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and before we jump into the specs and talking about this one specifically, let's talk about the form factor real quick, because you mentioned this is not an ultrabook. No one would ever confuse it for an ultrabook, but I mean, obviously someone in your position, having to maybe do something on the go, or being able to take your work with you, very, very valuable. But I mean, have you maybe in your day-to-day life or in a work setting, have you met anyone that really put a lot of emphasis on the ultrabook form factor? Or because I get that Apple was the one to push it with their their MacBook Airs, the super thin laptops, but I never got the sense that too many, like it's cool the first time you hear about it, but people never really cared as long as it was so portable.
Well, I mean, keep in mind we're talking about workstations at the ultrabook size level,
right?
So I don't really recognize the MacBooks as workstations. Ultrabooks, great. I see lots and lots of people, especially in agencies and creatives from commercial agencies. The MacBook Air is great. It's small. They do a lot of their stuff on it. But in the end, as far as a workstation's concerned, I really didn't see something that was ultrabook capable probably 3-4 years ago with the with the HP ZBook 14, and then I got my hands on the Dell M3800, which had a touchscreen 4K display, but was still thin and light, around 4 pounds, give or take. That machine I've got my qualms about, but about a year later, Dell turned around with the M5510, which I reviewed about a year and a half ago or so.
Right.
And that again, it's not like an ultra book anymore. I think that's sort of gone the way of the Dodo Bird. But thin and light and well built is the key. So it doesn't need to be the size and like 2 pounds like a MacBook Air, but we don't want to hulk around a giant gaming laptop or desktop replacement if we can avoid it. So I think that's the comfort zone that we're hitting, is something around 4 pounds that's maybe an inch thick at the most. And again, the weight is really where it's at for that form factor. So that's really where people are settling into. And HP's got the Studio series, and I took a look at one of their 15-inch Studio notebooks. Again, thin, light, really well built, powerful. And that's really what the conversation is in my neck of the woods.
Right. So let's talk about MSI. And obviously, you mentioned the the Quadro graphics card. If a lot of people out there maybe are not very familiar with the lineup, it's because, well, it's not really consumer facing. This is the lineup that is for, for servers or for, just for work, for business and business classes and things like that.
Yeah, fail-safe, yeah.
Right. So, talk about some of the strengths. Obviously the graphics card is going to be one of them, But, you know, where did MSI kind of put their eggs when it came to a workstation?
Well, I think they put a lot of thought into configuring and building this machine. One of the things we've talked about a lot before is using an M.2 SSD hard drive. And that's what they have in this machine, a 500 gig boot drive that's an M.2 Samsung drive. And that's super quick. So that's one facet of it, the storage in out. But also it has a mechanical 1 terabyte hard drive as well for longer term storage. So it's hard to say that they picked one thing and went for it.
Mm-hmm.
They sort of finessed everything together. Again, the P3000 Quadro card, that is probably, well, I mean, one thing about Quadros, they are professional grade. The driver sets, the hardware, they've been evaluated much more deeply than the consumer cards that go out there. So they're much more for mission critical and fail-safe environments. There is a price premium to them. There's a debatable argument, when you take one GeForce card and compare it to a comparable Quadro card, like for example, a Titan X versus a 6000 Quadro card.
Mm-hmm.
The hardware is very similar, but one is much more fail-safe, but it also costs 2-3 times as much.
Right.
So there's a lot of talk about, well, the GeForce will be faster a little bit, get the same numbers for cheaper. So it's really up to professionals and what they really need if they want to go the GeForce or the Quadro route. I'm fairly undecided. I've always trusted the Quadro brand, and have been fortunate enough to work with Quadros. The GeForces, my son has a Titan X in his computer, works fine, works great. I can load up and run Maya or 3ds Max just fine and do my work in it. So again, I think it's a debate that's going to go on forever. But with the Quadros, the price premium is in the support and the qualifications and the driver sets that really go in the camera. So with the P1000, it's mid-range card, but as a mobile machine, it's pretty impressive what it can do.
Right. No, and it's, you definitely need that redundancy. I mean, obviously they are trying to position this as, the working computer. And I've been trying to go through it, and one thing I noticed here, in as I kind of mentioned with display technology that we're going to be touching on a little bit later, but this does not offer 4K. You mentioned that the Dell laptop that you checked out did have a 4K monitor. This one is sporting just a 1080p monitor. How did that strike you?
No, that's a really great question. There's two of these. There's the WS63 and then the WS63 7RK. And the 7RK does have a 4K option. They're both IPS screens, which is fantastic for color, and that's one of the things that they really boast about this about the system. Color is a really big thing in graphics, obviously, and the way you look at color and the way you display color is really tremendously important. And you want to be able to make sure that the color space that you're viewing something in is going to be the same color space that your client or somebody else is going to be viewing in. So it's very subjective unless you really keep yourself to standards. And this is where one of these screens is really important. It's able to switch between sRGB, Adobe RGB, Rec 709, other different types of color spaces to allow you to switch your color space as needed to make sure that you're working in the same spaces as your clients.
Right.
As far as the 4K screen, I don't think I will really ever want to have a 4K laptop, especially one that's 17 inches or less. I've had 15.6 ones, like that Dell I mentioned before, and it's really very difficult to be able to do stuff in 3D, look at the icons, read the menus, because Windows 10, it's got the scaling feature, which is great. However, the graphic softwares like Max and Maya, they don't scale very well at all. There's glitches, there's issues, so we can't really enjoy 4K. And I really wanted 4K because of its dot pitch. Basically, it's dense and it's crisp and it's clean. However, you can't read it. I don't know
Yeah.
who'd be able to really look at a screen 3, 4 inches away from it, about you have your nose right up to the screen to really read what's going on. So
Well,
that I
yeah.
found that to be a major, major setback with the 4K 15-inch screen. So I actually requested that this one be HD and not UHD.
Right. Yeah, but I mean that's kind of the struggle that you have when you switch standards is that for the longest time, 1080p 1920 by 1080 was the standard for 5-6 years. It continues to be so probably for the next couple of years. But when you take a bump up, people aren't expecting that, or at least developers aren't specifically targeting that. So hey,
Right.
you're a little ahead of the curve there.
Yeah, I'm hoping that the Windows scaling will be much more rock solid. I'm a big fan of Windows 7, and I moved to Windows 10 for 4K compatibility. But so far I've been really kind of disappointed. So if I can run 4K at native 100%, no scaling, then everything's fine. And I personally, for me, and I'm 45. I find that I can't do 4K to anything under 27 inches. So, but what's important here is that this laptop's got Thunderbolt 3
Hmm.
and USB-C. You can hook this up, daisy chain it to a couple of other screens, and it will drive a 4K display, 27, 32, whatever size you want. It'll drive that as well. So when you're at your desk, you plug it in, you dock it, you do your work on your big screens. But when you got to jump on a plane or hop in your car and drive out to a client or whatever, I think it's best at the full HD as opposed to the Ultra HD.
Right. And yeah, that's even what the specs say, that you can run two 4K monitors off of, of course, externally. So,
That's right. Yep.
they definitely have thought of that. And the graphics card will, of course, handle all that stuff pretty well. So, I mean, so you mentioned the hard drive. The hard drive, I believe it's about the same one that I'm currently running with. And again, it was solely based on your recommendation that I went with an M.2. And folks, we used to say the best thing you could do to speed up an old computer was to replace a traditional hard drive with a solid state drive. And right now I'm a firm believer that if you want to spruce up an old computer, switch out that SSD with an M.2. It really is that that night and day fast.
It is. It is. I'm continually impressed at how fast I get to my Windows login screen when I open up a laptop or my machine. Aside from the hardware post where it goes through, it just blips up. And I remember, Windows taking 2 minutes to load off of my mechanical drives before. So it's a really big improvement.
Absolutely. So let's see what else. How's the cooling, by the way? Because this is a laptop. I can only imagine that someone out there is going to try to render something, while it's sitting in their lap. How's the cooling? Is it gonna set your desk on fire?
Actually, no. And this is one of the cool things about it. I've run my MacBook Pro. I have a couple of year old 17-inch Pro, and I've run it the same sort of benchmarks that I run on these reviews, and it would just set my pants on fire if it's sitting on my lap. This machine, I have to say, it's really well built. It feels very solid. The underside, I thought was a little interesting. They have like a velvet, not a velvet, a velour sort of soft pad under it, which makes it really, really nice to hold. And it would sit great on your lap if you're using it. I figured that would make cooling a lot harder because I wouldn't say it's a unibody, but it certainly feels like a nice solid unibody construction.
Hmm.
It's metal, and I figured that the case would be part of the cooling solution, like it is with the MacBooks. And I beat the heck out of this thing. What I do is I throw a number of benchmarks on it, a spec view perf. One of the main ones, I will just torture this machine hours on end, and I never really got too hot. Definitely is much without a doubt, but it won't set your desk on fire. It has a fairly efficient fan. You can definitely hear it when it starts cranking up, doing CPU or GPU intensive tasks. But it's not a vacuum cleaner. It's not terrible, but there's a little bit of a high pitched whine to it. But it keeps it cool and it keeps things running. Obviously, when you overheat, you're going to go down. Your system's going to crash. That's not something you really want. And I have not noticed the MSI
Hmm.
crashing in any of the tortures. And again, I'll run it for 48 hours on burn-in tests, and it's been doing fine. The top of the machine doesn't get too hot. It's actually pretty comfortable to use. Um, the underside does get warm for sure,
Right.
but not crazy.
Right. Well, you can only expect that when, let's face it, there's that much electricity running through, uh, you know,
Absolutely,
the
yeah.
circuits and all that. So heat is unavoidable, and if you have, X amount of power, you're gonna have X amount of heat waste. But hey, good to hear that it's not, going to be a hazard to your children if they happen to touch it. So
Yeah, exactly.
and I guess one last thing is that this might carry over into another conversation that might be better suited for its own show. Was that and I'm sure you've been paying attention, Dariush, with the Threadripper, and they came out with price
Hmm.
points recently. They had the new I think it was like 16 core and 12 core that AMD just announced about a week ago, I think. And obviously,
Yeah.
this computer that we're talking about here from MSI has been on the market longer than Threadripper was announced. And even besides that, Alienware has a monopoly on Threadrippers for the next through the end of the year. So, obviously they're going to go with Intel. Intel makes the best processors currently, but I see here that they run with an i7.
Hmm.
How was their, how'd you kind of think, what'd you kind of think of their choices? You know, because I believe there is, something above the i7 lineup for processors, you know,
Right. Yeah, they certainly can go with the Xeon route.
yeah.
And but those are pretty power hungry. They're more server based, but as I mentioned, one of the Dells that I've reviewed in the past, it was Xeon based, the laptop itself. I think i7 is a good way to go. The i9s, the multi-core processors Intel's coming out with, it's too soon to tell what's up, but the Threadripper for sure is cheaper,
Hmm.
promises pretty good performance in comparison. So it's interesting to see how these things suss out. With a mobile workstation, obviously you have to kind of balance your power usage with how much you're able to process. I would love to see uh, a good portable with a full desktop CPU that, when you're on the battery, can revert back to a mobile processor. No, that's certainly a lot to ask, but I think we've mentioned this before.
Yeah.
I would love a laptop that you can dock and that's a full desktop, and you take it up and then it relies on its own local CPU at that point. I think that's someplace to go in the future. But I think they made a good choice with the i7. It's the 7700, but it's the HQ again, so it's not full desktop. It's more of a mobile designation, and it's at a 2.8 gigahertz. So
Hmm.
it doesn't have the clock speed that my Skylake 6700K has at 4 gigahertz. But when I did some benchmarking on it, I used a V-Ray benchmark. V-Ray is a rendering software, and this benchmark is available for people to download from chaosgroup.com. This benchmark does rendering on the CPU and rendering on the GPU as well. And it's a really good gauge of how well the system can handle memory throughput as well as just pure calculation. And this did okay. It didn't blow me away, but the CPU level, the i7 on this was pretty good. It was about on par with a Xeon E5 2670 or an i7 desktop processor at 4770, which is an extreme version of a couple of, I think that's a Broadwell, if I'm not mistaken,
Right.
chipset. But the GPU is really where it came in at. The Quadro P3000 in this machine, in this benchmark, was about equivalent to two, again, desktop GeForce GTX 690s, and was also comparable to a Quadro Mobile 4000. I'm sorry, Maxwell 4000 desktop that has 8 gigs. So it really crushed it in the GPU, especially for being a mobile workstation, being able to compare itself in performance to two GeForce GTX cards in a full, box, not a laptop.
Right. And, obviously it is still a laptop. I'm sure if if someone was offering a full-blown desktop, they could put all the bells and whistles, but very good to hear that you think that they went with, what was the most sensible for, of course, the body. I think the last, kind of one of the last things I wanted to touch on this, you did mention Thunderbolt. Thunderbolt technology, I kind of, it definitely has its advantages. Data transfer rate, things like that are, just out of this world. But I mean, I thought that Apple kind of had, a lockdown on this. I mean, is Thunderbolt really that important of a technology to have on here? Or, did you find use for it?
Well, it's all rolled into USB Type-C port anyway, and that port handles USB 3.1 display port as well as Thunderbolt. So having the option to be able to throw a Thunderbolt hard drive or docking station or something like that is pretty important. But as far as which way to go, USB-C, Thunderbolt, I think it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Honestly, the throughputs are fairly similar. I think the USB standard Type-C is going to get more traction because it's out there more than Thunderbolt is. But
Yeah.
in the end, it's the same connector on the machine. So this is good because you have more options to plug into it.
Right. All right. And now the final, of course, for everyone out there just joining us, we are just wrapping up the WS63 7RK MSI, kind of workstation. So, I mean, you mentioned that MSI is trying to make headway into the space. You've mentioned HP, Dell, a lot of other competitors are already are already here. How does MSI stand at this point? Compared to its competition. Is this something to compare, to the others, or do they have work to catch up on? How does it look?
I think it's a very solid machine. I think they're going to make a good. I think they make a good case for themselves for a mobile workstation professional. I think it's tough to say because honestly, professionals want a machine that is fast and capable, but that's dependable. I've reviewed machines, I won't mention names, that after many months of using, even after the review has come in, it's been great, but then months later, it starts failing. Things, components, I've had thin and light workstations that were very promising, but ended up just being a nightmare and having to be replaced. So it's tough to say without really banging on a machine. I've had, as far as brand loyalty goes, I really enjoy the machines I've had with Dell and HP. Dependability is tending to skew a little bit more towards HP with the workstations, but I haven't had the MSI for more than a couple of months at this point. So it's hard to say where they're going to stack up in the durability portion of that.
Right, and of course, like you said, that's just going to take time. So, hey, Dariush, music means we have to take a break. Everyone out there, keep listening. Computer America, right after this.
We are all Brother Wolf. 10 years ago, a group of locals banded together to create positive change. We took animals into our homes, held adoption events at local retailers, and talked to the community about our mission to help build a no-kill Asheville. A decade later, we have achieved so many victories for animals in need. There's been so much progress, yet there's still so much to do. As part of our year-long celebration, we encourage you to become a member of our special Compassionate Circle program. With a monthly donation of $10 or more, you will have behind-the-scenes access to the work we are doing at Brother Wolf. Our goal is to reach 1,000 members because we receive no government funding. Working together, we can help build and sustain no-kill communities. Learn more at compassionatecircle.bwar.org. We are a 501c3 tax-deductible organization.
And welcome back to the Computer America Show. So, we are continuing on with Mr. Dariush Derakhshani, our computer graphics expert, and just finishing up a review of the WS63 7RK. We have a link to that in the show notes. And yeah, no, it's you seem to be very thorough with it. Glad that you think that MSI is putting their best foot forward here and is obviously. I mean, and what you say about reviews is very, very true. I mean, it's great to be one of the first ones to get your hands on a piece of technology, but, if you want to be more cautious, you can really save yourself a lot of headache because, it's not a computer, it's a smartphone case, and trust me, I review a lot of them, but I've been using one from, I reviewed one about 3 or 4 months ago, actually not even that long, like 2 months ago. And, it was waterproof, shockproof, all that good stuff. And just about 2 days ago, the place where your thumb goes with the home button, obviously for an iPhone, that part kind of peeled off. The adhesive came undone, and that means that this case is no longer waterproof. So the whole thing is kind of null and void. And, the initial review was very positive, but, given time, things can really start to show. So, hey, but at least out of the gate, MSI looking strong with with this workstation. So, all right. So moving on from reviews, let's move on to something that we touched on there a little bit, and this has to do with display technology. So I'm going to kind of let you introduce people into this field, but I will just say that this is something that you may think, oh, well, why does it matter? I have a 4K television and it has HDR. I'm sitting pretty, right? Like, that's all I need to know. And, if you could talk maybe about, the different kinds of video settings for televisions, and but computer monitors ask something completely different. So, feel free to take this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a wide array of choices and a lot of different price points that you can get into with screen. TVs and monitors, they used to be much, much more different long way back when everything was CRT. Now that we're all LCD or LED, the display market has kind of merged in some ways. A while ago, I had a lovely, lovely screen that started to flicker and die and become not so lovely anymore. So I started getting into figuring out, what's the next step for me? What am I going to do now? I have a very high expectation of my screens. And as I mentioned before, I can't do 4K at under 27 inch. 27 inch is the minimum for me to be able to run everything at 100%. But I mean, 27 inch for a lot of people and for a lot of monitor manufacturers, 27 inch is the high end that they kind of go. It's that's kind of like the tippy top of the consumer monitor
level.
It is. It is. But then again, I'm a graphics professional, so I expect a little bit more.
Yeah.
And that made it a little hard for me to figure out where to go. If if 27 is my minimum for 4K, what am I going to do now? Was basically the question I had before. And I was, looking it around. What do I get now? I'll get another 27-inch 4K monitor. And there's a lot out there that go from a couple of hundred or a few hundred up to about $1,000. And what's important for me as a graphics person is the panel has to be IPS. So the different types of panels in your screen dictate how well your color is communicated through the screen. And IPS is the basically the best panel that you can get, more or less, for color accuracy. Then there's how much color a monitor can display, its range, and that's usually 8-bit for most screens. Some cheaper screens go down to 6-bit, and the screens that I really want to get into or continue with are 10-bit. Now, what does that mean? So the number of bits define how many colors your screen can display. Most images across the internet and things that you see and work with are pretty much 8 bits. That gives you 16.7 million colors, and I personally counted each one of them. And it's basically about the threshold of human eyesight. So that works pretty much great for most everything. However, when you're a professional in graphics, you've got to be able to push the colors a lot. You've got to be able to re-expose images, make things lighter, darker without things starting to band or come apart. And that's where a 10-bit display is more capable, because it increases the number of colors that the monitor can display for you. So you can take an image and, let's say, the range of what somebody will really look at is going to be between B and C, for lack of a better word. You want to be able to go down below B and start reaching A, and you want to be able to go above C and start reaching D, because you're going to shift the image around. Eventually, it's going to end up in that 8-bit range between B and C, but you want the capability of being able to see as dark as A and as light as D. So that's where the 10 bits come in. And that also touches a little bit on HDR and what that's all about. And there's TVs with HDR designations out there. And the long and short of it is, you can only see so much brightness before your eyes have to adjust. So, for example, you're inside your house and you step out into a sunny day. For a moment or two, you've got to squint a little bit while your eyes adjust to the new lighting, and now you can see well outside. And if you go inside from a sunny day into a darker room, again, your eyes have to adjust a little bit, and everything seems kind of dark for a moment, and then things look normal again. That's obviously normal. You can only see so much range in brightness. Same thing with a camera. It can only capture so many stops of light or so much range of light to dark in one picture. HDR changes that by giving us a digital, a file where you can store a much greater range of that luminance, of that brightness information. So if I were to take a picture of a kitchen, for example, and the door of the kitchen is open to the outside and it's nice and bright, the normal picture, the doorway and the windows would be blown out, would be bright white. And if you go into Photoshop and you adjust that image, let's say you make it darker, what happens is the whole image gets darker, and the blown out areas in the door and in the window end up getting gray and darker and darker. What HDR would do is, if I did the same thing, if I have an HDR photo of that kitchen, as I expose down or make that image darker, what happens is the room, the kitchen itself, gets darker, but the outside starts to come in to a visible range. So instead of it being, a flat gray, you can actually see the grass and the trees and the sky outside. Just like you would step outside, you need your eyes to adjust, and then you can see everything really well without squinting. That's what HDR does. It gives you that access to a bigger range, a higher dynamic range of that brightness intensity, if that makes any sense.
No, it absolutely does. And I guess for what do you think this technology is suitable for? Is it for watching movies on, because obviously we're going to focus here on computer monitors, but what applications do you think this is best for? Obviously someone in your field and working with graphics and pictures and video editing, that's very, very important. But is this great for gaming? Is this great for movie watchers? Is this great for just, every computer out there? What do you kind of recommend HDR for?
I think it's going to be great for movies and games for sure, because movies not so much as games, because games typically would be rendered in real time, and if your character is inside a tunnel and they come out of the tunnel into the bright sun, the real-time render engine will do that sort of range shift for you that your eyes would do, and that gives you much richer, deeper blacks, as well as a good sort of experience. It'll look much more like you actually came out of a tunnel into a bright sky. So in these cases with an HDR, when you're inside the tunnel and you're looking out at the light coming from the tunnel, it's going to be all blown out and glared and kind of make you want to squint. That's what HDR is going to do. It's going to make it feel like it's more you in the tunnel as opposed to just watching a game. As far as movies go, unless they're being shot in HDR, unless they have that brightness range already being transmitted, for now, what HDR is going to give you is a better contrast range and deeper, truer black ranges. Of course, it's limited to how well your panel is lit, because black isn't really a color. Black is an absence of light.
Right.
But to see something, you need light. So a monitor has to light its panel, so you can never really have a real true black. HDR helps that, and it'll give you a nice inkier black to it, as well as making that range look more palatable to the eye.
Yeah, I always found that fun out at CES was that, you walk up to, Sony or someone with all these different displays on the wall, and they're like, it's like, yeah, we have HDR, and you can see, 48 billion different colors. It's like, oh, great. What color are you really going to show me that's going to blow my mind? And they're like, check out this black. And it's like, oh, all right, that's a color. There you go. But yeah, no, the black is the best way to, that's kind of the most noticeable because it has, like you said a dozen times this time, contrast. Black has the best contrast with all colors.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's where the HDR will really come in. Same thing with the games and movies. It's really that black level that's going to help a lot, and the panel and the way it's been backlit is really going to be what's going to carry that through. So finding a super cheap, ultra budget HDR panel will not be as good of a performer as a more expensive thing, because in electronics you usually, more than usually, get what you pay for. So the bigger brands, the better panels, they're going to be in the higher range screens, and this was the dilemma. I'm a fairly frugal person, let's just say, so I didn't want to be plunking down $700, $800, $900 for another 27-inch 4K display. But looking at the options, I don't want to go with a gaming monitor. The speeds would be faster, the refresh rates are generally faster on those, but the color accuracy is what'll suffer. And if you go the ultra budget, you're going to get probably a TN panel, TN, as opposed to an IPS. And those end up being 6-bit, where they fake, 6-bit ends up giving you many, many millions of colors less than the 16.7. So they end up faking it with dithering, where they sort of fake the extra color range that the panel actually misses. So that's completely unacceptable, at least at a professional range. So for me, it ends up being color, where for gamers, you're probably looking at your contrast ratio and definitely your response rate. How fast does a pixel change from one value to another value? And that's important to keep up with the frame rates that the game is trying to maintain.
I see. No, and obviously this is going to differ for people with different applications, and obviously we're going through your thought process. And so, okay, so color accuracy, very important to you. All these kinds of things. I mean, price obviously is going to matter, but what else? You mentioned that refresh rate wasn't kind of the biggest deal for you, but I mean, so you have a 27-inch, you have things like color accuracy, and I assume HDR. I mean, where did you kind of go from there? Did you kind of fanboy it up and go, well, I only do Asus, I only do ROC, I only do,
Right. Yeah.
Where do you start? Because there are a lot of manufacturers out there.
There are. And for me, the types of displays that I go for tend to be HP, tend to be Dell. They tend to be those two brands more than any others. They make really good professional screens. Dell, I've got at one of the jobs or offices that I work at, we have a couple of 4K 27-inch Dells. They're great. They're great screens. I've got HP 27-inch, and that's a great screen. The one I'm looking at right now is a Z display. It's a very high color accurate 27-inch HP, beautiful screen. That's what I judge my graphics on. It's not 4K, but I don't need it to be 4K. I need it to be color accurate. And I'll be
Right.
able to change my color space really easily when I go from client to client. So that's what's super important. This is about an $1,100 display.
Hmm.
What I came upon, I reached out to to BenQ,
Yeah.
and these guys are coming in with a couple of workstation class or professional grade screens for video editors, for CAD and 3D animators as well. They've got a couple of screens, so I've reached out and hopefully should be getting a 32-inch 4K display from them that is aimed for the CAD market, with a couple of improvements that they have, where you're able to switch between being in like a photo darkroom mode to a CAD mode, where it says it enhances the wireframe view of your screen. So all of those are great, and its speed is actually, I think, about 6 or 7 milliseconds, which the
Not
screens
bad.
I'm looking
Yeah.
at now, they're about 9 or 10. Gaming screens, the really fast ones are what, about 4 milliseconds?
There's a few. I think BenQ is actually boasting them for gaming monitors. 4 to 5 was kind of a big selling point, but I think it's gotten down to 1 to 2. That it's gotten down so
Wow.
low that people really don't care anymore. Like if it's a gaming monitor, 1 to 2 or 3 to 4 is kind of baseline, and at that point, it's almost instantaneous. No input lag.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's what gamers should be looking at. Probably first and foremost, your resolution, your size, and your response rate.
Right.
For anybody who is more interested in photo retouching, anything graphics related, response rate should be one of the last things you really consider. You're going to be looking at color, size, as well as resolution.
Right, and I can't speak highly enough about like I guess it never really clicked in my mind about the color accuracy, because I'm currently sitting here, with my computer, 3 different monitors. One is, I think, like a Gateway from like 2009. This thing is a beast. I love it. And then I also have the cheapest of the cheap off of Walmart, an Acer, and it costs like $70, marked up twice its price. And then I have a games monitor, and I do some stuff for the show, making the title cards and things like that. Depending on which screen I put, kind of Adobe Illustrator or Photoshop in, depending on which screen, they're completely different colors. So I just kind of sit here and go, well, it looks great on my left monitor, horrible on my right, and okay in my middle one. So,
right.
I mean, is there a verifiable stat that you can kind of go to, or is it just certain brands are going to have certain color, profiles?
Well, it's tough to say. You've got 2 screens, you're going to get 2 different colors. That's sort of the name of the game. When you're doing graphics, what I would do, Ben, is just pick one screen and have that be the screen that you judge everything off of.
Okay.
But if you have a couple of screens, and if you stretch a white window between the 3 of them, you're going to be horrified at how differently that white displays. One's going to be green, one's going to be purple. You don't get it until you really, really look at it. When you're at a point where you're doing a lot of professional work, color calibration is what you've got to do. And they have kits out there that are maybe a couple of $100 all the way up into the several hundred, where it measures the output of color and value from a screen, records it, and is able to calibrate that screen to a certain set of criteria. And that's where color match displays really come in, being able to be calibrated, and more importantly, to stay calibrated, because the electronics, the heat, environmental factors, your color will change over the course of time. With professional screens, they don't change quite as much, if at all, over weeks, months, even years of use.
Right.
And you're able to throw your calibrator on there and have it communicate with your monitor and set the levels that it needs, so that the response you get on one screen will at least be within striking distance of a similarly calibrated monitor, across the world or across the office.
Right. And one other piece of technology that I wanted to talk about when it came to monitors, and this is really going to deal with graphics cards, but there are monitors that when you buy them, and especially for gaming, but for other applications, they have these things, VSync compatible, G-Sync compatible, AMD FreeSync compatible, VESA Adaptive Sync. There's all these different kinds of synchronizing technology that is going to, as they call it, kind of smooth out the frame rate of all these different kinds of monitors. So you have things like VSync. VSync is, I think, kind of the solution that most people are familiar with. It's standard, and it matches your refresh cycle of your laptop, of your monitor, be it 30, be it 60, be it whatever, to any variable frame rate window you may have. And for most people, that's a video game. For others, it could be a movie, things like that. And there's different ways that that these technologies kind of do what they do. But at the end of the day, a lot of them kind of do this thing called triple buffering, where they'll kind of load the same frames over and over again. They'll kind of load at 300 frames per second, but then they'll only show 120 hertz or something like that. They'll kind of give you that redundancy, so you get zero screen tearing. I mean, obviously for you and your editing photos and things like that, screen tearing isn't that big of an issue. But I mean, how much do you feel people should really, obviously for video games, but just in general, movie watchers, general users, screen tearing?
I wouldn't pay too much attention to that, unless you're a hardcore gamer or you're a graphics professional getting into VR, because you want a smoother experience with VR. So you want to make sure your refresh rates are good, especially if you're doing multi-monitor work as well. so that everything is synced together between one screen and another. I think a long time ago that was called G-locking or gen locking between multiple video cards and multiple screens. So in those cases, they're definitely worthwhile. For the average user, I wouldn't really sweat it so much. It'll work its way, that technology, into regular consumer grade electronics and just be part of what it does. But for now, I don't think, aside from, I would say even medium to hardcore gaming and professional application, VR and so forth, that's when it's going to matter the most. In animation, maybe not so much. But outside of that, I think VR and high-end gaming.
Right. And, you know, just to give you some other specs that I've noticed, and I really do feel like the gaming population kind of drives what's next in store for the for the general consumer. And one thing I've noticed, and I'm wondering if you have any experience with it, is that 4K, obviously, that is the buzzword of the day. But for a lot of video gamers and for a lot of people, field of view, how much of the world that you can see with your monitor, it's becoming more and more of an issue as first-person shooters really start to pick up. But a lot of gamers aren't necessarily gravitating towards 4K monitors. They're looking for 21 by 9 or 1440 by 2560 by 1080. This 21 by 9 aspect ratio. What do you think of wider screens, not necessarily the traditional 1920 by 1080?
I think the more desktop you have, the better for you. I've got two 27-inch screens side by side, and I could definitely go for a third. I like desktop. I like being able to have multiple applications open. As far as gaming goes, I think the wider single screen will give you a better experience because you can see more side to side. That's for sure. So I think that'll give you a little bit of an edge. But a buddy of mine has a wider screen, Dell, I believe, and he really likes it because he can put two windows side by side and be able to edit back and forth between the two different windows pretty easily with the wider gamut. I just happen to do it with two screens, but I have to deal with, a 3-4 inch gap between the two screens,
right,
and the bezel and stuff like that. So,
same here. Yeah.
But yeah, for me, one won't be quite as good. One ultra wide won't be quite as good as having a couple side by side.
I think that the operating system kind of plays nicer with with multiple monitors, because let's say you wanted two screens side by side. I mean, with one monitor, it'll try to stretch the entire window to fit the one monitor. With two monitors, it'll be a little bit easier to control. I mean, obviously, just preference. I'm sure you will learn to love it. I mean, it's one of those things.
You will learn to love it. Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
It's one of those things. But yeah, no. And hey, folks, you can get freaky with it. I've seen people get a traditional 1920 by 1080 and turn it on its side and have a tall monitor. It's thin and tall. You can get I think the technology for monitors, it has gotten to the point where any configuration you can imagine,
90 seconds,
in any physical way, they can handle it. So, Dariush, my goodness, this hour flew by. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for running through display technologies, because it's developing really fast. So again, looking forward to your next visit. And if people want to find out more about what you do, where can they go? What can they check out?
You can check me out on Facebook, kush3d.com.
60 seconds.
My really old, horrible site, but yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Facebook's probably the best place. Take care.
All right, there you go. All right, thank you so much, Dariush. And everyone out there, thank you for joining us here on Computer America. And be sure to tune in tomorrow as we have the man, the myth, the legend, Marcel Gagne, talking all about Linux. And I believe we're going to be covering emulators. So if you want to relive the glory days of that Atari 2600 or, the Apple II, well, we got you covered here tomorrow with Linux. So Everyone, we're just about out of time. Thank you so much, and hey, same time tomorrow, 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern. Catch you then. Bye-bye.
Ten seconds.